The Arellano family piled into a blue four-door 1958 Buick Special on April 16, 1968, for a 190-mile drive to San Angelo from Villa de Fuente, just inside the Mexican border south of Piedras Negras, to visit a relative who had just given birth. The incident we are going to look into today happened in a desolate and rugged area known as Loma Alta in Valverde County, Texas. It's a tiny settlement which most people wouldn't remember should they ever pass through on US Highway 277. As you can see from Google Maps, the only building that stands out in any way is a store serving passing vehicles. Those same vehicles, as they make their way along Highway 277, may also notice a memorial stone along the roadside. Should they notice this, they may think it a homage to an unfortunate soul or souls who lost their lives in a road traffic accident, but they would be wrong. The stone marks the place of one of Texas's most gruesome and gratuitously violent mass murders. A mass murder that involved one family, the Arellanos. The Arellanos were a family of 6 that consisted of Juan Manuel Sr., aged 25, Monica, aged 25, Rosa, Juan's sister, who was 21, Manuel Jr., aged 5, Leticia, aged 2, and Eduardo, aged 1. The memorial stone was erected by a Peter Gomez Sr. who was working on Highway 277. 5 of the Arellanos were slain that day, Tuesday, April 16, 1968. One of the family members, Manuel Jr., would survive the brutal onslaught. The car they were driving in, a 1958 Buick Special, suffered a puncture, and Juan Manuel Sr. pulled over on the side of the road. It was approximately 6 p.m. Several highway workers asked if all was okay. They were politely told by Juan that it was something he could fix without much hassle. He placed the spare on, and the family went in the direction of San Angelo, Texas, where they were to visit Juan's sister. Luck being against them on this day, they only made it 5 miles before another tyre was punctured. They now had no spare, and the family did what any other person would do. They waited for a passerby that may give them a lift to the nearest garage. One man in a pickup did arrive and gave the Arellanos a lift 30 miles north up Highway 277 to Sonora. While the tyre was being repaired, Juan and his son Manuel walked over to a nearby restaurant and bought hamburgers. When the tyre was repaired, the man who had picked them up drove them back to the Buick at around 10 p.m. The next morning, a farmhand to one of the local ranches noticed a blood trail that went off towards the surrounding brush. Following this trail, he came to a tree and came across a hideous scene of brutality. A boy was lying in some weeds, face down, bloodied, and covered in dirt and gravel. It was Manuel Jr. His back was noticeably wounded with large lacerations, but he was alive, and he pleaded with the man for water. Once the water was provided, the farmhand called police, and they arrived at the scene a short time after and searched the area. Behind a wire fence that ran adjacent to Highway 277, they found Juan Manuel Sr. dead beside a water trough. Other members of his family were found close by. Eduardo, only 15 months old, was dead, and his 2-year-old sister Leticia was found in the gravel and shrubs that goats, snakes and armadillos normally inhabit. Manuel and Leticia were brought to nearby hospitals, and the police continued their search along Highway 277. A mile south of where the body of Juan was discovered, they found that of his wife Monica. She was found in a ditch 30 meters off the highway. Surrounding her, they noticed torn clothes which were scattered all around. It was amongst this turmoil that Rosa, Manuel's sister, was found deceased and lying naked amongst the brush. Police were naturally horrified. This sleepy county had never experienced anything so horrific, and the local sheriff simply concluded that this was the work of a maniac. Manuel Jr., the first of the family to be discovered, and one of two discovered alive, was being treated for horrendous injuries. He had been stabbed 4 times, and the perp had coldly shot him in the back of the head. Once he was stabilised, he was transported by helicopter to a hospital in San Antonio, where he could get the intensive care he required. His sister Letitia's injuries were far more damaging. She had been savagely beaten, stabbed numerous times, and a gunshot wound between her eyes had led to the right side of her body being paralysed. She would sadly pass away from these injuries 2 days later. When the autopsies were performed, it was determined that Juan had been beaten, stabbed and shot. His wife Monica had been shot and stabbed, and his sister Rosa had been subjected to a sickening sexual assault and then stabbed to death. The youngest of the Arellanos, Eduardo, had been stabbed in the back 3 times. In the days that followed, the police scoured the surrounding area for any piece of evidence that might lead them to the killer. They found very little, other than tyre marks they believed to be from the killer's vehicle, and they knew that the killer had used a .22 caliber pistol or rifle. Their theory was that the man who had brought them 30 miles north to Sonora and waited with them while they had their tyre repaired before bringing them back was the killer. The one hope they had was Manuel Jr. When the story broke, a number of people came forward. One was a driver for oilfield bus lines who drove that route twice a day. At about 7 p.m, he noticed a white pickup parked near the family car. Standing around the car were the Arellanos and a white man in a straw cowboy hat and elaborate boots. The witness said he had sandy hair, was freckled or had liver spots on his forehead, and was in full cowboy attire. On his way back north that night, the same driver noticed the Arellanos' car still parked at the side of the road, though no one was there. 2 weeks after his attack, the boy was able to tell authorities about a white man, a quote, big cowboy, unquote, who was assisting them before murdering his father. Police distributed a sketch of a possible suspect, a tall, sandy-haired man in his 30s wearing a straw cowboy hat and driving a pickup truck. The sketch was based on information from a David Lorden, a service attendant at the Sonora service station who repaired the tyre for the family. Lorden said that they all arrived in a 1967 Fleetside Series 10 pickup truck that was either green or blue with a white top. The man was white, between 30 and 35, about 6'2" and weighed 200 pounds. Like the driver, he said he had sandy hair, but also said there were pockmarks or a rash on his neck. Lorden also stated that the cowboy boots he had on had an eagle on them, and he was equipped with a knife placed in a purpose-made holder. The man had apparently drove the family 30 miles north to the service station before accompanying them back to where the car was stranded. An alert went out nationwide, notifying law enforcement to be on the lookout for a man fitting the description. They also focused on tracing the vehicle. A number of people came forward after the slayings to say they had seen an unknown man dressed in the elaborate cowboy clothes described later around the Sonora area. However, he was nowhere to be seen in the days after the slayings. A number of people were questioned and put before the individuals who had seen the man being sought, though none of the men were deemed to resemble the perp. As police questioned Manuel further, he was able to give them more details about the fateful evening. He stated that on the way back to the broken down car, the man had took shots out of his window after coming across deer and rabbits traversing the highway on that dark night. Juan Manuel Sr. was angered by this, as the behaviour was scaring the other members of his family. Rather than stop, he pulled the car over, shot a deer on the fringe of the road, and made Juan help in retrieving the deer. On their way to get the deer, Manuel said he could see the cowboy turn on his father and shoot him. He then returned to a dismayed and traumatised family and beat, shot and stabbed them all. The children were discarded over the fence, and then the man returned to the pickup, driving off with the adult women. As we know, They were found a mile further down the road, and Rosa had been sexually assaulted. Manuel was released into the care of his uncle and went back to Mexico. When police interviewed Manuel later, he told investigators a little more about the man responsible for the carnage. He added that the man had, quote, heavy shoulders, slim hips, and he carried a knife that was bone-handled, end quote. All of which appears pretty detailed for a young traumatised boy of 5. A lead in the case came on May 13, 1968, from the city of Fort Worth, Texas. Police in the city contacted Texas Ranger A.Y. Ali Jr. They had recently pulled 2 men over and discovered that one of them was in possession of 2 expired driver's licenses, one from Texas, the other Colorado. This individual also had with him the identification of a Mexican national and 160 pesos, as well as a .22 caliber pistol. The man was 40 years old and his hair had recently been dyed black, but his original colour was sandy brown, and like the man police sought in the Arellano murders, he wore cowboy boots etched with eagles. Instantly intrigued, Ranger Raleigh went and got David Lorden from Sonora and went with him in the company of 2 other lawmen to Fort Worth. On viewing the lineup, Lorden told officers that neither of the men were the one he had seen with the family on that fateful day. A number of months later, Lorden, the police's crucial witness, was himself charged for forgery and held in custody. He would later make an escape from the jail where he was being held after somehow obtaining a guard's rifle. He and another man would go on the run, however he was later detained in San Francisco and brought back to Texas. It has been reported that police brought many potential suspects before him, though it appears as though he never identified any of them, and he himself was ruled out by the police. Eventually, all persons of interest in the case dried up completely, and police no longer knew what direction to take the case. It was cold. They would have to wait 30 years before interest was reignited when Texas police were called in 1999 by someone claiming to know who was responsible for the slayings. Brooks Long, an investigator with the Texas Rangers, began a fresh review of the case and obtained some evidence that allowed them to generate a DNA profile of the killer. They used the DNA profile to test whether a man in California may have been the killer. He had committed a crime with very similar details to those in the Arellano case. There was no match, and the promising lead led nowhere once again. Manuel Jr. was contacted by Brooks Long during his investigation, and though he could not add anything to the case, it turned out that he went on to have a successful career in finance. During the interview, Manuel would point out the scars he had been inflicted with 30 years before and told of the memories he had from the day. With this interview, any chance of finding the killer had come to an end. This is one strange case that makes little to no sense. So many questions can't be answered definitively. Why would a seemingly good Samaritan pick up a family stranded on the roadside, bring them to a small town so that he could be identified by witnesses and then put them back in the car, only to commit one of the most gross acts of inhumanity one could possibly imagine? Feel free to leave your comments below.